Welcome to the Mr. Futurist podcast, where we discuss business automation as well as advancing disruptive technologies like artificial intelligence and its global impact on companies, jobs, and careers. A technological tsunami is coming in larger and larger waves. Will your company, job, and career be prepared for it? Find out. And now your host, Dave Holt.
Hello, everyone. This week's podcast is going to be on the dark side, but I promise that if you stay with me until the end of this, I will flip it around and I will take something that appears to be very, very much gloom and doom, and I will give it a possible happy ending. So this has a possible happy ending, so stay with me. Having studied artificial intelligence and business automation for the last couple of years, I believe the unemployment numbers in the U.S. and worldwide over the next 5 years, because of technological automation, will be a lot higher than anyone is talking about. I did find a couple examples on the internet that I think give a good pulse to what some polls are saying could happen within the next 5 to 10 years. I will admit, though, that I don't like polls, as most of us or all of us should have found out. A lot of these polls are biased and are created to make people think in a certain direction. But I think these are pretty good and give a good example of what I'm talking about. A recent report by Think Tank Center for Cities estimates that 1 in 5, or 3.6 million, British jobs will probably be displaced by 2030 due to automation and globalization. McKinsey research says that 1/3 of U.S. workers and 800 million people globally could be replaced by 2030. And I have a copy of these articles on my post on the Mr. Futurist website. In fact, all the things I'm referencing you can find there. The news is spinning distractions. What's new? Mainstream and internet media is continuing to spin major distractions that are keeping people away from learning the truth about what's happening with technology. I don't think this is something purposely being done to distract people away from the subject. It's being done to sensationalize everything and keep people staring into a screen for as long as possible, especially when these things are negative and cause large emotional reactions. And a lot of people are paying attention. This seems to be the protocol for how the media works and has for a while, as well as social media. It keeps people's eyeballs staring into their screens for a longer time, capitalizing on their emotional impulses or their lack of control over their emotional impulses with negative, distractive information. Right now, it seems like we have the big drama, the big distraction of the week, every single week. Every week something happens and a new distraction and drama comes to replace the one before it. Think about how this negative emotional media roller coaster ride is affecting and infecting people, making people angry and at the same time fearful. It's constantly happening. Recently, I heard presidential candidate Andrew Yang talk about the need for a universal wage of $1,000 a month for every U.S. citizen. At first, I was skeptical and thought this was some type of political marketing spin and tactic attempting to get people's attention. But then I watched Mr. Yang talk on the Joe Rogan show for a couple hours, and then I watched more of his videos on YouTube. And the more videos I watched of him talking and learning about him, including going to his website, I came to believe that he's genuine and sincere about the things he's talking about. What was also interesting is that a lot of the things he's saying are things I've been talking about for the last couple years. So I can completely relate to him and understand where he's coming from. Now, this podcast isn't about politics, and it's not about supporting a presidential candidate. But it is about supporting ideas that make sense, and you'll find out why I think that's the case. It's amazing that none of the other presidential candidates are talking about a universal basic income. Because as you will find out, it's probably one of the most important subjects right now that we can discuss in the United States and in the world besides global warming, and I'm not going to get into that. In this podcast, let's look at his plan. Let's see if it will work, and what will happen in the next 5 years to the U.S. economy if something like this isn't implemented. What will the results be and look like? The U.S. South is headed for an economic crash. I've discussed this before, that the southern United States is headed for a deep crash, a deep economic crash. The top 5 employment industries in the U.S. South are healthcare, retail, manufacturing, education, and hospitality. Automation technology will impact all of those industries. In fact, retail and manufacturing will be completely automated away, and there will not even be jobs for people in those industries in the next 5 to 10 years, and I think closer to 5 years. Healthcare will radically change as more jobs are lost to technology in that industry, as well as education, technology, and hospitality. All will lose a great deal of jobs because of technology and be radically changed. All of these industries that support the southern United States will soon become outdated and will not even exist in their present form. I talked about this a couple years ago. There's a disaster waiting to happen in the southern part of the United States, and no one is talking about it. And one of the biggest reasons for this is not just a lot of people losing their jobs, but reports also show that the U.S. South has the unhealthiest states in the entire country. For the 29th year in a row, the United Health Foundation has ranked America's states. And states in the southern part of the United States rank last. These reports list such things as physical activity, obesity, child poverty rates, percentage of uninsured people, drug deaths, smoking, violent crime, excessive drinking, and lack of healthcare workers. And I put a copy of these reports as well on Mr. Future so you can check them out, associated with the article with this podcast. This means that a great part of the U.S. will be impacted directly by technological change in job and industry loss. But it will also put the greatest burden we've ever seen on the U.S. healthcare system. A system that's already overburdened. There's no way that the healthcare system in the southern U.S. can handle what's coming. Many in the South, I'm sure, will migrate to states of the Midwest and West Coast to seek employment and healthcare options. But there will not be jobs for many people. And the overburdened U.S. healthcare system cannot deal with something like this. I've spoken with many people in the healthcare industry over the past couple of years, and I've even worked in that industry. And I can tell you that the U.S. healthcare system is overburdened right now to where this would break it if it happened. And that will affect everyone. According to the United Health Foundation report, Louisiana has the highest rates of obesity as well as the highest percentage of children in poverty and also the highest rate of infectious diseases. Mississippi has the highest rate of heart disease deaths and high diabetes among its residents. Alabama has a lack of healthcare workers from dentists to mental health professionals for its population. Arkansas has some of the highest cancer and heart disease death rates of all the 50 states. South Carolina has seen its obesity rates increase by 11% over the past 6 years to 34.1% of adults in that state. Automation unemployment will increase the already unhealthy situation in the southern United States. Looking at a study as of 2014, the top job in 29 states is truck and delivery drivers, and that hasn't changed. The trucking industry will be greatly impacted by self-driving trucks in the next 5 years. This is something I also heard Andrew Yang talk about. The largest industry in the United States is one that's going to radically change. When you look at the top 5 industries driving the U.S. economy in 2019, you'll get a real picture of what's to come. According to Investopedia.com, the 5 industries right now driving the U.S. economy are healthcare, technology, construction, retail, and non-durable manufacturing. The retail trade accounts for 6% of the country's GDP that has a value of $905 billion. The retail industry is also the largest employer in the United States, according to World Atlas. And 10% of total employment in the United States is in retail. According to the National Retail Federation, retail supports 1 in 4 U.S. jobs, or 42 million working Americans. That alone is 6% of the U.S. GDP, or $905 billion, that will be impacted. Jobs will disappear from the largest employer in the United States as it's transformed to automation. That's 42 million U.S. jobs that will be replaced. The retail and manufacturing industries will deposit somewhere in the neighborhood of over 50 plus million people into the ranks of the unemployed in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think that's closer to 5 years. That's not counting truck drivers and transportation, the largest industry in many states in the U.S. that I just talked about. This will only add to it. Now, don't get worried or depressed, like many people do watching the mainstream media news, because I promise a solution is on the way. But we need to talk about a couple more things first. Not many people are talking about how artificial intelligence automation will affect white-collar jobs. This is something I wrote an article about last year because I was watching many of these jobs already disappear with layoffs. Check out the article and podcast I did last year on this subject. The U.S. economy is built on a house of sand, and it's still more relevant than ever. Automation will affect white-collar jobs first. Lower middle management and junior level executive positions were being replaced last year in many companies. And this wasn't something that was making the news because it wasn't sensational enough. It wouldn't have people staring into their computers and their phones, and it would put people in a fear mode to where they might even turn off the news. So they weren't reporting it. This is something that's going to continue to happen, not only in 2019, but over the next 5 years, it will increase in numbers. The truth is that white-collar jobs are easier to replace with technology than blue-collar jobs, and they will be replaced in mass. As you can see, a huge technological tsunami is headed towards the U.S. and world economy. It's coming in waves, and these waves will just get larger and larger over time. It doesn't appear that the media is concerned. It also doesn't appear that U.S. politicians are concerned about this because hardly anyone's talking about it besides Andrew Yang. What can be done about this, if anything? Presidential candidate Andrew Yang's Universal Basic Income Plan, known as UBI, is a plan that gives $1,000 a month to all Americans over 18 years old, and I think it makes sense. It's not enough money for anyone to live on, but it's enough for people to start a business and pay bills. It's also enough money to energize a lot of communities right now in the United States where people don't have an extra income. Is the U.S. becoming a third world country? I think that's a question we should all start asking ourselves. I recently heard on a Joe Rogan podcast that there are millions of people in the U.S. Southern Gulf states that are living on $2 a day. That's $14 a week. Can you imagine? In a book called $2 a Day, Living on Almost Nothing in America, Catherine Eden and H. Luke Schaefer reveal that there's nearly 1.5 million American households with practically no cash income. This means we have people right now in the U.S. starving. They can't even find food for themselves and their families, and are doing what they can to feed themselves by looking for food every day in garbage containers. This isn't something that's happening in a third world country. It's happening right now in the United States, and it paints a very bleak picture for the future if something is not done. $1,000 a month could help many people to pay bills, have shelter, and get something to eat. This should be the right of every U.S. citizen. When you look at how many people today cannot even afford a $1,000 emergency expense, it's frightening. A new survey from LendingTree finds that 6 out of 10 millennials, that's ages 22 to 37, say they don't have enough put away to handle a $1,000 emergency expense. Only 48% of Americans say they can handle a $1,000 emergency using cash or savings in their bank accounts. These statistics alone show why $1,000 a month universal basic income would go a long way in helping a lot of Americans. It also shows that many Americans need a little bit more money to live and pay their bills. These are not people that are not working. I have talked with many young mothers, single mothers, who are tired because they're having to work 2 and 3 jobs in fast food and retail just to survive, just to feed their children, just to have shelter for themselves and for their kids. Something needs to be done about this because no one who's working 2 and 3 jobs a week to support their family and just to survive is lazy, as some people in the media like to claim. Let's play the game of Monopoly. I think you all know how that's played. Let's use the game of Monopoly as an example of what I think is happening and what will happen if change doesn't happen. 10 people sit down and they're playing the game of Monopoly. 2 of the people playing represent giant U.S. technology companies and U.S. corporations. The other 8 people playing the game are middle and lower class Americans. The 2 players that are representing the technology companies and large corporations have a lot more money to start with, a lot more than the other 8 people. They also get the advantage of moving around the board numerous times and buying property before the rest of the people playing the game even get a chance to start. Now all 10 people are playing this game of Monopoly. The 2 people who represent the large technology companies and large U.S. corporations now own the best, most valuable pieces of property on the board. Because of the extra money they have and the advantages they have of being able to go around the board without the rest of the players playing, they're now stacking hotels on these properties. And in this game, you can stack as many hotels as you want. The other 8 people now play the game and see how long they can last and survive. And it's not going to take long before all of their money is gone and given to the other 2 players. All 8 of them will eventually lose, regardless of what they started with and what they had. That's what we're facing in the United States and worldwide in the future with automation and technology. And I want to just interject here that I'm not saying that automation and technology is a bad thing, because I don't believe that it is. But as we transition into the future and go more and more into an automated world, all I'm saying is that we need to adjust to this so that people, our economy, our country, our world, and even our planet can survive it. A universal basic income is great for U.S. companies, and I'm going to tell you why. One thing that I heard Andrew Yang say is that universal basic income of $1,000 a month is not only good for people to be able to pay bills and have money to spend, but it's also a good thing for companies. Companies will pay what he calls a value-added tax of 10%, but they're going to reap the rewards from this. Because when people have extra disposable income, they spend it. People are going to be buying these same companies' products and services. They will continue to have consumers. A lot more money will go back to Amazon and to other corporations. Companies will get a lot of that money back. So what they're actually doing by supporting this value-added tax and a universal income is they're not only investing in themselves, they're investing in the U.S. economy at the same time. It's really a business investment for the future of capitalism and corporate America. I'll tell you what happens if these companies don't do this. As tens of millions of Americans become unemployed because of technology and automation, and large numbers of them leave the workforce and can no longer earn a living, at that point, they'll stop purchasing and they'll go into survival mode. They'll stop buying entertainment. They'll start looking for bargains. This will set up a huge competition among companies, especially large corporations, that compete for mass consumer dollars. Since there will be less of these mass consumer dollars, these companies will have to compete at a level that they've never known before. This will drive down their profits, and many of them will go out of business. They will all have to play this game, large and small companies, playing something I call corporate Russian roulette. Who survives and who doesn't? Fiercely competing for the meager consumer spend that's left. That's the game these companies will then be asked to play because it's something they've helped to create. And this will work against all of them as it makes them more competitive and it drives their prices down. For this reason, it's better to give people a little back. They can all afford it. And stay in business and have consumers with expendable income, or else they can play the hyper-competitive corporate Russian roulette game. Companies that voluntarily and publicly support the value-added tax and a universal basic income will come out way ahead because they're now seen as companies investing in the United States and helping people to live better lives. This is a win-win situation, and I'm not sure why many large U.S. technology companies and large corporations are not jumping on this opportunity and supporting Andrew Yang and his value-added tax and universal basic income. Now, I'm not saying that these corporate leaders should say that they support Andrew Yang for president of the United States, but they certainly should be talking about this idea and why it's a great idea. Think of the amount of positive PR that could come out of that. But again, they're all staying silent and not saying anything. What does that tell you? What does that tell us? Socialism scare tactics, Cold War baby boomer nonsense. I've heard a lot of people lately on the mainstream news sites saying that this is a bad idea to give people a universal basic income because they need to work. And they call it socialism. And they keep demanding, where's this money going to come from? How about the companies that are making hundreds of billions of dollars a year and not paying any taxes? Tell the single mother who's working 2 and 3 jobs a week just to keep a roof over her family's head and food on the table with just barely enough left over to send her kids to school that she doesn't need more money and she needs to keep doing this. Tell that to people who were failed by an outdated U.S. public school system that didn't even teach them to read. And we're going to get into that. All of these people can be trained for future jobs, right? All these people on the media, oh, well, people should be trained for the jobs of the future that will be there. They should be educated for jobs of the future. Well, let's talk about that. Illiteracy in the United States. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development found that 50% of U.S. adults can't read a book at an 8th grade level. Now you know why the mainstream media talks down to people the way that it does. Approximately 32 million adults in the United States can't even read, according to the U.S. Department of Education and the National Institute of Literacy. 45 million Americans are functionally illiterate and read below a 5th grade level. 3 out of 4 people on welfare can't even read. 50% of the unemployed between the ages of 16 and 21 cannot read well enough to be considered functionally literate. Between 46 and 51% of American adults have an income well below poverty level because of their inability to read. Illiteracy costs American taxpayers an estimated $20 billion a year, and nothing is being done about this. Does this sound like a society of people that can be educated for future technology jobs? Does this even sound like a society where even if college education were free, would it really help them? As I have pointed out with the literacy, this is something the mainstream news doesn't discuss. There's no way that an illiterate U.S. society where tens of millions of people cannot read or barely read and write can be trained for future technological jobs. In a country where the public education system has not been properly funded for many years, and public school teachers around the U.S. have to go on strike to make a livable wage, how can people who cannot read or write become programmers, coders, and software developers for the future? And will those jobs even be there? They're not, and they won't, because they can't. It's ridiculous for anyone to say a lot of people can be trained for the jobs of the future, because it makes little sense. And I'm not sure they're even living in the real world with the rest of us. Technology and automation job loss will affect a lot of people, blue-collar and white-collar jobs. In the next 5 years, we'll see a great deal of unemployment and major changes. Here's what we have to look forward to if change doesn't happen. The Great Technological Worldwide Depression. Don't worry. Like I said, I will spin this around, and it's not going to stay gloom and doomy. We're going to have another recession. We always do, and they come in cycles, and we're due for another one pretty quickly. This recession, or the one behind it, because of mass layoffs that will come with it, so that companies can automate, that's what they're waiting for, is going to be a very, very deep recession. When the jobs don't come back because they're being automated away during this deep recession, this deep recession will turn into a U.S. depression. This will make the great U.S. depression of 1929 look like nothing, because this will be a global depression, unlike anything we've ever seen and dealt with before. This will not only be a Great Depression in the United States, but it will affect the entire world. We'll have an entire worldwide economic collapse. This is the horror of the future that all of us have to look forward to, unless we understand what's coming and we do the right things. The right thing, I believe, is to create a universal basic income and pay everybody $1,000 a month, untaxed, in every person's pocket every month. And that's just the start, because it will have to, at some point, become a living wage for many people later on. This is not socialism. It's just a really smart thing to do. I don't believe, like I said before, it benefits large technology companies and large U.S. corporations to live in a world where capitalism collapses and there's a massive economic worldwide collapse and depression. I don't think anyone wants to live in that world, no matter how much money and power they have. But this is something that can be prevented if we act, if we do something now. Realize what's happening. And you can help by sending out this podcast or my article to other people. Spread it around so they can become aware of really what's going on. Let's demand and support Andrew Yang's universal basic income for every American citizen, as well as provide health care for every American citizen like the rest of the world does. At least we'll have a healthcare model that won't go bankrupt because we can restructure it to do this. I'm not saying that you should go out and vote for Andrew Yang as president. That's not what this is about. You can if you want, but that's not what this podcast is about. It's not political. It's about a man who's running for president who has an idea that's amazing, and it's an idea that works, and the things he's saying are correct and true. And the media is attacking him. Not all, but a lot of them are. There is a large technological tsunami coming, and we can prevent its devastation by being prepared for it. We have plenty of advance notice that it's coming, and we know what to do and what our future looks like if we don't do anything. What we do now as a country will be completely up to all of us. And putting our heads in the sand and not thinking about it because it sounds scary and we don't want to deal with it only makes matters worse. There are solutions. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I told you at the end I would pull you out of the gloom and doom, and I hope that I did. But these are some real issues that we need to think about. I really appreciate you tuning in. Please share this. Please subscribe to MrFuturist.com, and I will be back next week with another article and podcast. Thanks, and have a great week.
Thank you for tuning in to our Mr. Futurist podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on MrFuturist.com. Please join us again next week as we continue to discuss the impact that automation, advancing disruptive technology, and artificial intelligence will have on the global business community, jobs, and careers.